be the more exercise I do, the fitter I'm going to get. That's my assumption. That's positivistic thinking. It's just thinking straight away, if I do this, and all I have to do is do this and I can prove it right. That's how a positivistic thinking would occur. But most of our life, we're trying to disprove these things, like the tomato sauce bottle, or like the effects of drugs on mental health and stuff like that. The science of that is trying to disprove it. It's only in that sort of physical sciences, that the physical sort of biology of running and exercise, that you're actually thinking positivistically. Okay, going back to this. Paradigm one, the one that we don't like to use the words on. The research, and all research will have an aim in it, but you don't have to get the aim for this, but it's just that there will always be an aim. And the aim, for an example of this, and this will show you how simple it actually is, it's just that they use a lot of language. The aim might be to track differences or to measure an effectiveness. And so it might first ask, are there any differences? Because that is trying to disprove, that's the null bit there. I want to see what the differences are. So I'm going to look at it by saying first, are there any differences? Not by actually saying there are differences. I've done this when I worked in NZCER in the stats unit there. There is a tool of analysis called chi-square. You don't need to know all this, okay? Because all you need to know is what that P thing means up there. If they've got a P, if you're reading something like Laura you've got, and they've got somewhere in it P equals 0.001, you know they're saying they're far away from the null hypothesis, so there must be an effect. And the way this works is, I will do, as a statistic person, you don't see this in your reports, I'll put in gender here, and I'll put the topic that we were looking at, gender differences in science performance. So science here.
This is a null, no?
This is how I'll report it. Yeah, this is me testing for the null. Now down here I've got male, female, pass, fail, and I might have 3, 8, 5 here, 2, 8, 3 here, 1, 0, 2, 5, 0, 6. That's a box I'll be using. I throw it in the computer, put those numbers in that box. It does what's called chi-square analysis, and it will come out with this p-value. And it will tell me that because these boxes are very, very different, they're not the same, there is a difference in science. Girls are more likely to fail in science. And the researcher will always use that term more likely, because someone else might come out and they might do another set of tests and actually prove the null hypothesis that there is no difference. So I use those terms more likely. So first I want to know if there's differences, and then I want to know what those differences are. And I can say, I can't do chi-squares in my head. So I'll just say it's done it, and it's gone P equals 0.0000554. And I'll go, boy, oh boy, oh boy, I've got no idea what that really means statistically, but that's a long way from number one, so therefore it's significant. That's how basic the stats are read. It's a long, long way from one, so therefore it's significant.
The difference is significant, however, the sample might be a small sample, so it might actually mean it.
And the researcher will put that down in their limitations. A good researcher will put that down in their limitations. This is going to be key for when you're doing that final assignment. But what you would be then expecting, if the question was, what are the success rates of patients with schizophrenia on a 12-month intervention program? What are the success rates? Oh, measure. What are the success rates? That's a measurement. I'm going to be predicting that they're going to do a positivistic or post-positivistic approach, and they're probably going to be testing for the null hypothesis, so that's going to be there. And then when I look at the article, I can sort of put ticks over each of those because I've seen that they've done that. There's huge constraints in this sort of research, huge constraints. in order to be good, this research needs lots of people. And if your article is doing all of this, and researchers know this like me, if they've got really small numbers in those boxes, like each of those boxes has to have 30 or more in, which I know means that you should at least have 150 people in a study, and you still might not have a box of 30 in. Because it could end up being that you got 20 in one and 40 in another. So all I know is, when I'm looking at it, the sample needs to be big. If I've got a quantitative one, I'm expecting a big sample. I'm expecting me to tell me the limitations of their sample. You need to have a lot of money. I don't know how the Dunedin study copes. That's been going for 40 years with over 1,000 young people. Where is the money coming from for that? And the actual instruments that you have to use to measure, all of that is really expensive. Another constraint, and this is what knocks all of us as professionals, you need to have statistical knowledge. You need to know how to do that, and there's the alpha one, and like I say, I have to have a stats book with me if I'm reading it. I can't tell you what alpha means. And I think it has to equal 1. And then there's another one, there's the beta, a B. So there's a whole lot of different instruments they use. So all I'm looking for is, I'm hoping I've got a peer-reviewed article, and I'm hoping that they're using terms in the article like there is a correlation, which means there's a relationship between these things, or more likely. So I'm hoping that the article will tell me, and then I might go to a book and see what I'm looking for those degrees of significance, if I need to. The stuff there is huge. The constraints are really, really huge on the statistical knowledge. In fact, when I was at NZCER, I might say, you might have thought I was in the stats department, I worked with the stats department. They did all the work for me. I would go and give them the numbers for the boxes. They would go and do the maths, come back and give me the p-value. So I actually had statisticians working for me that knew what they were doing. So the two types, well, there's actually 3, but one of them you don't see a lot anymore because of ethical reasons. The 2 types of methods that get used a lot in this are textual analysis. So there's in social sciences, people actually might do a lot of research on newspaper articles and documents to see what's been happening there. Tests and survey research. We'll go into what these actually look like next week, but they will actually say test or survey if they've done that in the research that you've got. You may also find experiments being used. This is the place of experiments, or quasi-experiments. Quasi means pretend experiments, because we can't actually make experiments really work. That's the paradigm that we wish we never have to swim in, but we often do. The constructivist is our first step into the qualitative. So the aim's there on exploring and understanding. That is why as soon as I saw perceptions, I knew I was going to be exploring and understanding the worlds of these young homeless youth in this article. I could guess straight away that they were constructing the story for me. That's why it was constructivist. And you'll see that the questions sound like that too. How do young people experience school? What are the experiences of youth in this initiative? What are the experiences of clients going through a DBT program? What are the experiences of practitioners working on whānau ora? So it's looking for stories. As soon as I get that constructivist thing, I know, yeah, bang on, stories. Constructing, making a story. The purpose of this sort of work is quite that, well, people in the positivistic paradigm will poo-poo all of this because they'll say, actually the stories are very limited because the sample is always going to be so small. You can't go and get the stories of 10,000 people and make sense of them as one story without turning them into numbers. And that's what will happen if someone went to do stories of 10,000 people. What you would read is 5 people said this, 6 people said this, 7 people said that. So that's why I know that actually it's only for a specific context. And that's why a lot of this stuff will be in case study research. So they'll say, we're looking at this group of people in this context. That's why I put perceptions of resilience and coping in the state of Texas. Because I wanted to know the constraints of where they were working. There can also, because a lot of us, at times we'll find ourselves having to slip into researcher mode in our practitioner role, and there's often confusion over roles. And this has particularly happened in the field of youth work, because a lot of youth workers do try to become researchers in this paradigm, and they forget that when they're a researcher, they have to leave the youth worker at the door. I could say this the same for counselling, like going back to that unstructured interview idea. When you step into a researcher role and you go into an unstructured interview, you do need to know the difference between leading for an answer and pushing for an opinion. It's very, very easy to start to hear what you think you hear in someone's story and actually go, I'll just ask you a question, Lisa, and you can answer it anyway, and then I'll start to lead off that question rather than allowing it to flow where it should go. Lisa, how was school for you?
Good.
So the teachers were good?
Okay.
What do you mean okay? Did they actually stigmatise you?
I think I didn't understand what they were asking.
Was that because you're Māori?
Could be.
I really led there. I really led there. But the very first step into leading was when I said stigmatise. I listened because I had my past roles. I've been transcribing as well, and there was one interview. And they call the hard sciences, like I talked, the sciences, hard sciences up at Vic, and social sciences, soft sciences, and it's very masculine, feminine. But I was with a feminist researcher who was interviewing a male geographer up at Vic, and I was transcribing, and I couldn't believe what I'd heard. It went something like, the guy was saying, I really am enjoying bringing in some of the political aspects to climate change in my course. And then the researcher says, this is when it automatically starts leading. Have you ever considered going and talking to the people in political sciences? No. Oh, that's because you're in the hard sciences, isn't it? And that was so leading, and that is one of the huge dangers of not understanding how to leave roles and opinions and everything at the door. Qualitative researchers, our job is so much harder. It's so easy to be a quantitative researcher. If you've got a stats team behind you, you're sweet. And then you just trust the peer reviewer to make sure that they've checked that your stats are right. But a qualitative one, that catalytic validity and everything, I know that if we took that, well, we did take that interview back to him, and he asked not to have that being used. So confusion over roles. Case studies one, ethnography is another one, and that's when you actually live and work within a community. So there's two ways constructivist ones work. The second way is actually to construct a theory. This is where the theory stuff comes out. You're not going to see a lot of that in the articles that you choose, because they don't tend to write a methodology on how they create a theory. And you will see a lot of this stuff's done. I was going to write on a pen here. A lot of this is called grounded research, grounded methodologies, where someone is allowing all the information to create its own story and not to create a story from the information. That's constructing a theory. So all the theories that you use at some point came out of a constructivist or mixed method approach. So someone like Piaget would have done a very strong mixed methods approach. The Dunedin study, nah, not really doing it, but it is constructing a theory of an idea of what it is, but it would say it's not a theory, it's a hypothesis. And we still have to disprove it. So how do Asian young people experience adolescence? Well, they elements of constraint, sense of mental problems. The constraints are external validity, and that just means the story may not be one that meets them, it actually covers all young people. For that, say that Asian young people experience adolescence, and I've worked with 20 young Chinese people in New Zealand, and I've constructed a theory that's all about respect for elders. I haven't actually explored, I've called it Asian, but I haven't explored the experiences of young Japanese. I haven't explored the experiences of Malaysian. I actually haven't explored the diversity within China, and having been to China, it's an incredibly diverse country. Methodologies are case studies again in ethnography. Then when I take you through the final paradigms, these all come out of the constructivist ones, but they're just focused in on different groups and different questions. So if you end up with an article that is looking at women's experiences going through some form of therapy or program, then that will fall out of the feminist paradigm. Or what are experiences of LGBTQ youth? That's again taking a feminist approach, which means that gender matters. That's how these researchers work. They will bring in storytelling quite deeply. Narrative storytelling comes out of the feminist camp of actually allowing the person to tell their whole story, and that whole story becomes printed in an article. Not just part, the whole story. Right, then we jump into our other ones. Ethnic. So the whānau ora question I had, yes, it comes out of constructivist, but it can also fall into here. What are the experiences of practitioners in whānau ora? And I might want to actually do a kaupapa Māori research on that. So I might actually determine that that's the type of method I'm going to use, which actually transforms the way ethics are done, because kaupapa Māori research actually questions some of the ethics that are in traditional research practice, particularly the one around confidentiality. So when I was involved in a digital storytelling project to the United Nations where young people told their stories, a marae came to me and said, why do you have confidentiality there? These stories belong to our young people. By taking their names away from their stories, you're taking a part of them away. So their names need to be attached to the story. That's one of the essential things in kaupapa Māori research is confidentiality needs to be negotiated, and the research is done very much like a potpourri. So there needs to be set rituals in place. And this is why in the class I have set rituals in place as well. There may also be Talanoa research, which is a very new research methodology, a Pacifica research methodology, which is very much about honouring the space. So allowing for silence and allowing for discussion. This is one of my favourite ones because I like the word Marxist. Marxist research is not about let's get all communist. Okay, Marxist research always assumes that there's going to be a structural inequality in the system. There's always going to be differences for young working, particularly in a class, because that's where Marx comes from, with young working class people, or working classes and middle classes. There's always going to be a difference. This now broadens out. In places like New Zealand, people use Marxist methodologies to explore structural differences in our education system for Māori, Pacifica, refugee, migrant, Asian, Pākehā and other. And one big aim that has been used quite a lot in youth research is actually to look at the way mentoring, it's a very common youth work practice, and we teach it and tell our students they have to do it. One of the key Marxist questions I've seen quite often are on the differences and how mentoring actually imposes and reinforces structural inequalities. So that research looks at the outcomes, and it then looks at the outcomes for different groups. It will then look as to see, and it uses complex terms. Hegemonic means, does anyone know what that means? So I don't have to explain it.
People with power. Hegemony is to have power over.
To have power over. It's to live the lie. A good movie to show you what hegemony is V for Vendetta. So everyone's in this world and they all accept the structural lie of the world, and the lie has been set up by the system of that world. So that's what hegemony means. Matrix is another one too, that's, if you've seen these movies. So the idea in New Zealand that we're all created equal and that no matter what we do in life, we all have equal opportunities, that's actually a hegemony. It's a lie. experiences are very different. This is me. I am Marxist as well. I will say that, and I'll own that because I'm big on inequality. So what's been found in this research, believe it or not, is that mentoring programs tend to be focused on Māori and Pacifica young people, and it's another Marxist term, as such they label them, which means they see them as problematic. And so therefore mentoring programs may not be as successful as people claim they are. And that simple approach of labelling. When a kid gets pulled out of school, and I'm picking on the BYD students, yo Clifford, you can come and join into this mentoring program because we think you're not going to really, it's going to be a bit of a struggle through school, so we'll get you hooked into mentors right now. You'll be sweet, bro. That sort of talk is considered, and that's what happens sometimes in these mentoring programs, is considered reinforcing a structural inequality that Māori and Pacifica youth need mentoring more than Pākehā youth. It's not that mentoring doesn't work. This research doesn't question about whether it's effective. It questions about what it targets and what the impact of that target could be long-term wise as a hygienic tool.
Is that an assumption? Or you just...
And well, there's been research done on this as well, and I'll give you another example, transition programs. I know I'm focusing in on young people, but transition programs in school, so in year 9, I've got to get my years right, 7 and 8, year 7 and 8. 7 and 8, that's intermediate years. A lot of stuff goes into place that sets you up for high school. Okay. Now, once you get into high school, the experiences often of some of the streaming in high schools that happen is that often Māori and Pacifica young people, just by colour, are actually placed into the unit standard classrooms, not the achievement standard classrooms. One of our first year students, actually in the BYD, is working in one of these schools at the moment, and he said it's quite funny. This school was completely streamed. In the top stream, they've got all the Asian students, and the two middle streams, they've got all the Pākehā students, and in the bottom streams, they've got all the Māori, Pacifica, refugee and migrant students.
So there's the hegemony.
That's the hegemony at work. And it's not that it doesn't work. I'm not saying that the process doesn't work, it's just that they're saying it's enforcing the hegemony.
I had the same sort of experience with my daughter. She was very eloquent in English when we came over to New Zealand. And she was put in an English speaking class, and her English was really good. But I felt so annoyed because they thought she was a refugee student and she wouldn't be able to speak English. But they hadn't, interacted with her to find out how much English she has. So yes, I agree with you that really happens.
And that's what this Marxist research is really, really interested in. And so Marxist research isn't scared to use the tools that you find in the positivistic framework. Because if it can get the stats, it can prove you wrong. And there's even been huge, massive statistical studies being done on teachers' language and young people. And what it's found is that teachers, if they're put into low stream classes, don't talk even down to young people. They hide the key terms from the young people that they need to succeed.
Yep.
And then if the teacher is working with students that are seen as high achieving, they're not afraid to use a big language. And I don't know all of your backgrounds. I do know the BYD background. I'll get you speaking in a minute, Hazel, but I can say within the BYD background, one of the key things that we're always enforcing within the BYD, because this is true for our BYD students, is that they have often been in those classes at school that have been talked down upon, not been given the right terms, and a class like this is to enable you to know those terms that were taken from you. I said to you in the first class that we were all born researchers. The fact is we've been told it's a different language. Hazel?
Just a question. Is that, how you were talking about the classes and stuff, is that within the criteria or, well, not within the criteria? Is that because of the criteria or is that because of the teachers themselves?
There's been quite a lot of research on what drives it.
Yeah.
A lot of it, it's unintentional.
They don't know they're doing it.
Like, am I still have very high data class, middle class, and the smarty pants. Obviously, teachers couldn't call them that, but you knew straight away where you sat. And it was for all the subjects. So you're either cabbage, like OK class, or the smarty pants class.
Would it be the same, I don't know, I'm like thinking back when I was at school, but I was school C, so we were all in the same class, like we didn't have like...
Some of the school C classes
You know,
were
like
streamed,
different-
and some schools they were streamed. And my school in Westport, they were streamed. Yeah.
Subject or 6 subject classes. It was 6 subject classes often got better teachers.
So some school, not all schools streamed for school C, but then there was other inherent problems within school C that happened too, and one of those was the scaling that happened. So 50% had to fail and 50% had to pass.
It's all to do with funding, isn't it?
No, with the school, with the way there's, and a lot of things, we have improved a lot of things in education. So with the school C system, you would have some streaming occurring. But you take me off a tangent. So you've also got the issue between high schools and colleges, which some BYD students know. So if you're in a community in Wellington and you've got a high school or a college that was built after 1950, they have been built in working class communities to serve the factories. They're technically, those colleges and those communities are technically high schools, and the high schools are built as factory producing. Lisa, you remember all this because we've done this in the critical practice. So the high school, so Hutt Valley High, Wainui High, Wainui had a college, but that was built past I think it was the 1960s. Nainai College was built after 1960. All those schools in the Hutt Valley, some of the schools in Porirua were built to serve the big factories. So the education that was given in those places were given to produce factory workers. The colleges, the traditional colleges, most of these cluster in the Wellington area, and other areas like Eastbourne, colleges were made to produce university graduates. So, and this is how the original system was originally set up. Things changed, school leaving age went, school cert came in, this is after 1950, and there was an assumption, because of the positivistic way that people thought, that we can't all be the same. That means that not everyone in this room can achieve something. The assumption used to always be that there'll be failures and there'll be successes. So thereby, we should always determine things by what's called the normal, and they would do all of school C with this lovely thing here called a normal distribution curve. And the idea was there would always be a normal. There would be a normal science student, a normal maths student. They'll be the 50%ers. Either side of that, 50% had to fail or 50% had to pass. And those of us who went through the school C system, our teachers used to say to us, make sure you get 60 or more %, because if you get scaled down, you risk failing. And what we found from the school C system is those high school kids and those college kids, they weren't getting the same education. Remember, language in classrooms, they weren't given the same tools and languages as the college kids. The college kids could easily get the 70, 80, 90s. The ones going through a high school system, particularly if they were streamed down in a high school, like my school, Buller High, there was a lot of streaming there, you knew that that class was going to fail. And they knew that they were going to fail. All of this would say is the hegemony that's going on in the system. Researching like myself now within a Marxist paradigm, I would say, well, the same thing happens at NCEA, because we have our unit standard classrooms, our mixed classrooms, and our achievement standard classrooms, and teachers saying to people, why don't you take the unit standard path? I can say on a WellTech Open Day, and Lisa's joined me, it's really, really interesting, and it really disappoints me. I believe our degree, I've taught up at Vic, our degrees down here are just as good as up at Vic. But they're actually better, because you get the practical knowledge and the theoretical knowledge, and a course like this, it might suck, they still have to do up at Vic, and the students still complain up there too. I've taught this up there as well. But the thing about the open days, and this shows all of this into action, the kids that come to the open days are the brown kids from the high schools and traditional colleges. They get bussed around. And the open day for the degrees that happens here, we might get 3 or 4 students interested. The high schools and colleges aren't going to send the kids to a polytech for a degree.
Yeah. Like my mum cried when I said I wanted to go to WellTech because she didn't think it was a proper school.
Yeah.
Oh.
You had your hand up.
Yeah, I had a question about, in the school system, they still have an RTLB class there for those who, they say, resource teaching, learning and behaviour, for students like,
There's only now one place that trains for RTLBs, and that's Massey, so there's a huge demand for them. So they do still do have them, but there's not a lot of them around.
and the students that do go into, that are referred into their class have huge dynamics.
Very huge.
Yeah. So they suffer from a lot of, so it's like they're still, I don't know if you call that hegemony, because,
Any practice that segregates, that divides, puts people into groups is seen as a legitimate practice, particularly if it happens early on because it's socialisation.
but this is to do with their personal development and education, like they're not, some are on medication and, so how do you, it's like some youth have been diagnosed with ADHD and this is where they go to.
Yeah, it's about the practices that are used in those classrooms, and I haven't done much research on this. So there's always going to be some form of segregation, and no matter, even Marx would agree that if you can't get a world without inequality. That's what he would argue. That once he uses big complex terms, proletariat and bourgeois. Once the proletariat, which is the plebs, rise up, then the bourgeois, the people who've got power, end up going under. But with that RTLB question in that, I'm like, we need to be looking at our practices within school and the languages that teachers are using. And we have to move on from this slide because this is not about education. But I would encourage people to talk to the BYD students, because some of them have had placements in these classrooms, and they can talk to you about the language that gets used and the differences of the language, and how a really good teacher knows the importance of relationship. And RTLB, some are absolutely fantastic because they have had some good training. Some, not all, but there's.
I don't think I think it's a good thing, because some cannot cope in this, their constant classroom style.
I'm totally I'm someone that's totally against the education system full stop because of the classroom style.
I get it anyway.
The secret when it comes to all of this is the relationship and the teacher and the attitude that the teacher comes into the classroom with. And with myself, my field is educational sociology, so I'm very, very critical of the education system as it stands. But that's Marxism. So cultural studies isn't about studying culture. Cultural studies comes from the Birmingham School. You can ask the BYD students what the Birmingham School is. Cliff will be able to tell you next week. The Birmingham School of Sociology in London, and cultural studies it takes one step beyond the Marxism. It wants to know where and what the myths are in society, and how truth is constructed. And this is, like I say, this is where my research comes in. So I'm interested in the whakapapa of youth development theory, the whakapapa of a word like democracy, and understanding that the word democracy, when it originally came out in ancient Greece, wasn't about every person voting. It always had people that were excluded. And if you follow that whakapapa through, you can see those same people feeling excluded now. So cultural studies is always about questioning knowledge and where knowledge comes from and who has the power within that knowledge. So we do a lot of post-structural discourse analysis, which is so complex, I'm not going to really go into it in this course because you probably won't find an article with it. The closest way of saying that I go is it's whakapapa research. So my research, my PhD, looking at young people and young offenders, I went back to the very first Theories of Human Development by G. Stanley Hall and saw that he labelled young ethnic group people as unable to full stop to achieve adulthood, and only European youth were capable of achieving maturity. And I then looked at his theory, looked at how time has evolved by using stuff like that bell-shaped curve over there, because for a very long time that was how deviance was seen with young people. Back in the 1950s, and now we talk about normal young people, normal development, which comes from this. So it's very interested in whakapapa, and then I'm able to say at the end of it, this is why we're seeing a lot of young Māori Pacifica and migrant youth actually being stigmatised by the system. The whakapapa knowledge takes us there. So that's that one.
Measures against racism.
Yeah, it's really powerful in looking at racism. It's like one of the ones that I'm interested in looking at is the Facebook posts that have, I've collected them all, on media reports about the mayor in New Plymouth,
Yeah.
and how there was a tirade of racism against him, and actually looking at where that racism comes from. That is cultural studies. It actually says, here's the voice now, but that voice has a whakapapa that goes back to colonial New Zealand. So let's explore it.
She had a good article.
Yes, that's where all of that stuff comes. Final one is mixed methods. And you know it's a mixed methods when it's about measuring something, but also finding the stories. It's a very common approach. Key constraint, again, is you can only use a small group, and but this is the one that, particularly if you're in youth development, this is the method that gets used a lot. In counselling and looking at the client-counsellor relationship, this is the one that gets used a lot. Unfortunately, if you're looking at therapies and specific mental illnesses or specific issues, you'll often see a lot of post-positivistic stuff done.
Would you say it sounded like Fiona at the previous cultural studies is really aligned with narrative therapy in terms of when you come to a client from a frame of deconstructing some of those the power dynamics external to the individual.
Yeah.
Do you see there?
I would say that they both flow alongside each other very nicely. And it's a really great article by Wendy Jury. It's not a research article, and I don't know whether you can get it, but if anyone's interested in it, I've got it on my database. And it's looking at post-structural approaches to therapy, and it's very much a narrative style approach. Some really interesting stuff's come out of it. A research article that I was involved in looked at collective biography, and that was the idea that all of our stories have a theme that can create one story. And it really was about deconstructing self and finding agency in a collective story. It's a very complex approach, but yeah, the two really align quite. Yeah, and they don't teach a lot of livingness in counselling in New Zealand. But livingness is used quite a lot in the States for psychotherapy, and his concept is always allowing the person in front of you, just always seeing the person and seeing the face of the person in front of you directly, and acknowledging their face, and acknowledging that their face, it's all about presence and about allowing that person to actually be in that presence with you.
They're welcoming the other.
Yeah, livingness, that's it.
It's kanohi te klānui.
Yeah, so that's all within a research methodology. It's all cultural studies all fused into it.
Who is that person that you're talking about? The leader is on the
Livingness.
Someone jury.
Yeah.
And Wendy Jury
Livingness.
is the University of Waikato person who writes, but she writes about counselling extensively. But livingness is, if you want to have some horrible Christmas reading, he can successfully write one sentence over a whole page. So he's pretty complex. Okay, so that question, you'll be able to go, yep, this is what I'm going to see. This is what I'm going to predict I'm going to see when it comes to the methods. So there's some key basic methods, and we're going to go into these a little bit more in depth next week. There's textual analysis, and that's actually just looking at text. It could be, and one of the things that people like myself love looking at in a cultural studies aspect is we like looking at the historical text and looking at the text today and looking at the footprints that remain. That's a textual analysis. But in a positivistic, post-positivistic paradigm, it might actually be counting the number of articles / ethnic paradigm, counting the number of articles in a newspaper that talk about Māori people positively, counting the number of articles in a newspaper over a year, so lots of articles that talk about Māori people negatively, and then actually literally counting with the hypothesis that there'll be no difference between the two. With the null hypothesis, no difference between the two, and the hypothesis of the negative outnumbering the positive.
It's really, really, really good.
There has been research done on this, so this is us an ethnic question within a positivistic paradigm. What's the difference? The null hypothesis is no difference. The hypothesis is yes, there is a difference. Probably in the negative is what we see. Every single newspaper article in the Dominion Post gets counted for an entire year. And in order to get, and this is how we got a really good positivistic, post-positivistic one, we're going to also count every other article about people too, so we can compare them. Just Māori and other in this. So we'll clump Asian, Pacifica, and Pākehā all together in one group. And what we find out after a year is, yes, there is quite a significant difference. The P, when I put them all in the box, the P comes to 0.02845. It's a long way from one, so therefore, yeah. So that's why textual analysis basically can be used in any of the paradigms. But it's always used to see what the story is there. Surveys are when you go and ask questions, typically on paper, but most often nowadays on a computer, like SurveyMonkey is a program that we use. That can be done pretty much everywhere, but it's not going to be done as much in the positivistic ones. And that's simply because they tend to use tests instead of surveys. And I'll bring some tests next week for you to see. A test is something that's been written by someone else and has been tested for things. Observations, sitting down and watching what's actually happening, recording everything. There's a skill to observations, a real big skill. That's a qualitative one. This way you can always see mixed along with the observations. Qualitative, it's about getting the story. No one who's trying to count is going to do a lot of observations. Interviews can be used across all, but they're going to differ. It's only going to be structured in a positivistic. It's then going to be semi-structured if you're a beginner in it, because you're going to try and control yourself leading. And if you're really, really talented, which I'm not yet, it's going to be unstructured. And that is a simple, tell me your story. And knowing how to listen to what you have to prompt for. I had our break just yep. Okay, this is not going to be as dried out now. So we got this. This is what I'm predicting on my one side of my brainstorm. This is how I would do it, because this way you're showing yourself as actually beginning to learn what you picked up in the course. You're doing a prediction of what you're going to see. And then on the other side, down here, I might go, yes, article talks about stories. What have we got? Expect interviews. Where's my article? What did they do for the methodology? So I've predicted it's going to be interviews. I'm just going to go straight to methodology and see what they've said their methods are. Method sample. Oh, it said sample on my sheet. I better quickly put sample down on this side. Sample. And it is typical drop-in centre youth. Youth, Texas. Voila, that relates directly to my research question. I've got that research question pretty much right. See? Okay, so I've got my prediction side. The prediction side just means that and you could be wrong. You can go, nah, not used, use this instead, because I don't know if they've used interviews. They might have used focus groups, data collection. Yes! Semi-structured interviews.
So we can find this on whatever article we choose from off the Moodle, eh?
From those databases, yeah. Yeah, and if you find one that's interesting to you,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, now if you've got one of those quantitative ones, you're going to expect that the analysis is going to have stats. So you're probably going to have down here, say, stats going off here, some form of stats, and then you'll be able to confirm it that they've used stats. You can be able to say, I don't know how to read the stats if you don't know how to read the stats. But there's stats there.
Can you say that?
Yeah, it's a mind map.
Yeah.
It's
I find stats pretty boggling.
yeah, well, I'll go through a little bit next week with you, and you'll get a bit more of an understanding.
Sample.
What's the, you know, relevance for you that it being semi-structured?
Because I can then go, I've got semi-structured here. What that then does is I've got a qualitative approach here,
Yeah.
and so I can then go connect that right to here. Haven't yet, but I haven't read yet. But expect interviews as a qualitative approach.
So you're putting guesses and their facts.
Yeah, well, I'm putting. I would say put your guesses in. Don't just go and put all the facts in. By putting your guesses in, you're using the mind map as a learning tool. By putting all the facts in that you're reading, then actually
Mix up your pieces.
yeah. If you just put in the facts, it's going to be quite not hollow, but it's not going to be useful for you as a tool. I want you to be able to predict and then verify, because that means that you're beginning to understand. If you can see the question says, what is the effectiveness of this? I want you then to go, I predict this is a quantitative approach, probably post-positivistic, because they're probably going to use those funny stats that I can't read. Okay, and I'm going to expect that they might be using tests, or they might be using a massive amount of data that they've got from somewhere. And then you can then start verifying it on that other side and start to really tick yourself off, ding, 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 that you actually know what's actually going on there.